Welcome to the Cup Tasters membership. We're so excited that you've chosen to join, and we're really looking forward to 6 months of comparative coffee tasting. If you're watching this video, it means that you've recently received a welcome box, which includes a bag of freshly roasted coffee and some simple cupping gear. Today, we're going to talk about everything you need to know to set up a simple cup tasting. And we're also going to identify a few pieces of equipment that you'll want to have in place before you receive your first box. So let's see what we have in the box here. First and foremost, freshly roasted coffee. So we've sent every member a 5-ounce bag of Passenger's Keystone Blend. This is one of my all-time favorite coffees on our menu, and for our whole team, consistently one of the highest scoring coffees on the cupping table. It comes from 2 of our foundational partnerships, Divino Niño in Huila, Colombia, and Agaro in southwestern Ethiopia. Additionally, we've got 2 beautiful cupping bowls for you. These are the exact same cupping bowls that we use every week for production cuppings at Passenger. We've got a shiny new cupping spoon for you, very beautiful. And last but not least, a packet of ground coffee that will serve as a reference for you when you're dialing in your grinder. So let's take a few moments and talk about some additional pieces of equipment that you'll want to have in place before you get your first membership box. First, and perhaps most important, a digital scale. I want to definitely stress that you don't need a super fancy scale to enjoy these tastings. But it will be really helpful if you have a digital scale to help you weigh the coffee and the water really accurately. One of the keys to having sort of a very clear comparison between coffees is eliminating as many variables as possible to ensure that what you're tasting as a difference is down to the coffee. Additionally, we definitely recommend that you have some type of a timer. So it might be a kitchen timer like this, it might be your watch, it might be a phone, but that'll definitely come in handy. You'll want a coffee grinder of some kind. We're going to be shipping you whole bean coffee so that your tasting can be enjoyed as freshly as possible. We'll talk about this a little more, but essentially the idea with this little packet of ground coffee is to provide a reference point, given the fact that many of us will be using very different grinders. Using this as a visual reference will hopefully help you dial in your grind so that we can be pretty close in terms of how the coffees are tasting. But if in doubt, shoot for a medium fine grind. Water, of course, as with anything to do with tasting coffee, is hugely important. So the first thing you're going to want to find is a source of clean filtered water. It's often the case that tap water works great, but it's also true that sometimes tap water has a lot of chlorine or other additives that definitely hold back your tasting experience. So if in doubt, go to the grocery store and pick up a bottle of Deer Park or something similar that will be a pretty clean, filtered, neutral water to use for your tasting. You'll also want a kettle like this, or even a classic stovetop kettle to heat your water to a boil. And finally, you're going to want a cup like this, maybe even a couple cups, to use in addition to your cupping bowls as a rinse cup in between tasting. And honestly, that's going to be about it. Once you have all of these pieces in place, you're ready for a cup tasting. Okay, we've covered all of our bases, and now it's time to talk about how to set up a simple cup tasting. So the first step is to weigh out your coffee. My plan is to set up 2 cups of the same coffee, Keystone, and I'm going to use 15 grams per cup. So I'm just going to weigh out the coffee once, 30 grams in this glass cup right here. So the coffee's weighed out. We're pretty much ready to grind the doses for our cup tasting. But before I go ahead and do that, I'm going to grab just a couple more beans and I'm going to put them through the grinder ahead of time. The idea is to sort of purge the grinder of any sort of flavors from previous coffees that we ground on it to make sure that those don't translate to our tasting. Just gonna drop through. At that point, we have our purge. We can just discard that, and then we're ready to grind the doses for our tasting. So we went ahead and purged the grinder, and we've ground our coffee for the 2 doses that we want to cup today. So all that's left to do at this stage is to weigh out 13 grams of ground coffee in each cup. So I'm just going to do that. Weigh out my first dose of 13 grams. Perfect. Grab another one here. Make sure you tear your scale in between so you don't get the weight of the cup. And up to 13. Lovely. So at this stage, we've got our 2 cups, and we're ready to kind of move the scale to the side for a second. We're going to set these cups up here. And at this stage, you definitely don't want to miss out on smelling the dry fragrance. So before we do anything else, just enjoy the aromatics of this beautiful, freshly ground coffee. So later in the membership, we'll talk more about aromatics and coffee and ways that you can think about and describe what you're experiencing at this stage. But for now, just enjoy. The next step is to add hot water to it. Right here, I've got a nice kettle of water just off the boil, ready for the tasting. And so we're going to go back to using our scale to measure the water dose in addition to the coffee dose. So I'm going to set the scale under the cup of coffee. I'm going to tare it again to 0. And the other thing that I'm going to make sure is that I have my timer. So right before I start pouring the water, I'm going to start my timer to sort of really kick off the tasting. So hot water here, start the timer, and pour. I'm going to pour in gentle circles until the scale reads 200. Perfect. At this stage, I'm going to move the cup gently to the side, put the other cup on the scale, tare it, and pour to 200 again. Nice and gentle, making an effort to sort of evenly saturate the grounds as best I can. And you can go ahead and enjoy the aromatics again now that you've added hot water to the ground coffee. You may find that you sort of experience something new with the coffee at this stage, and you may not. It may smell just the same, but that's another stage that, generally speaking, we'll evaluate when we're tasting coffees throughout the membership. At this stage, my timer is at about 1 minute, and I'm going to continue waiting until it says 4 minutes, and that's when I'm going to break the crust of this coffee. We may as well take a moment to talk a little bit about what that entails. So there's a nice crust of coffee grounds at the top of the cup, and what we're going to do at 4 minutes is use this spoon to push through the crust, allowing most of those coffee particles to sink to the bottom. And with your second break, something else to try is to bend closer to the coffee and sort of smell the aromatics as you're pushing the spoon through the crust. It's often the case that you may sort of experience a little puff of aromatics that you didn't notice before earlier in the tasting. And this stage generally in the industry is just called the break. At this stage, we're going to wait for our timer to reach about 15 minutes. So we're going to give this coffee some time to cool, because if we tasted it right now, it really wouldn't be pleasant. It's definitely too hot to enjoy. But there's one other step that we're going to take, and that is to skim this foam, which is largely composed of coffee oils from the top of the coffee to make sure that it's prepared to enjoy when it reaches the ideal temperature. So you'll want an additional couple of spoons and another cup to sort of skim into. And in terms of these spoons, honestly, it doesn't matter. You can use some very standard spoons from your kitchen. You can use a spoon like this, kind of like a big soup spoon. At the end of the day, having two spoons that are the same size is probably the most important thing, but you'll develop your skimming technique no matter what spoons you choose. So what we'll do is take our two spoons, once again, dip them in the water first. And then what I'm gonna do is nestle them inside each other like so. Slowly kind of put them just below the edge of the coffee and use them as a pair to gently skim most of this coffee foam off the surface. And then I'm just gonna dump it in this cup here. Once again, I'm always gonna rinse the spoons in between cups. So take the spoons, start with them nestled together, and as you pull through the foam, you may find that you need to stretch them a little bit to cover the surface area that you need to get a nice clean skim. The reason for skimming the foam off the top, it's not like there's anything wrong with it, it's not like it'll hurt you, but coffee oils, generally speaking, are very bitter. So to get a balanced taste of these coffees, emphasizing all the flavor complexity and sweetness that we're looking for, we'll definitely have a better experience if we skim the foam first. So I'm just gonna give these a little bit of a clean here, and we're all set. We're gonna wait a few more minutes and they'll be ready to taste. We've got 2 cups of coffee that have cooled to an ideal place. I'm looking at right about 15 minutes on the timer. So it's time to pick up our cupping spoons and start tasting. The first thing that you're gonna wanna do is dip your cupping spoon in that rinse cup. And then you're gonna go to your first cup of coffee and just gently skim a small sample of coffee right into the bowl of your cupping spoon. And then what you're gonna do is basically slurp it. The idea of sort of spraying that sample of coffee over a large proportion of your mouth just engages more of your taste buds. So the idea here is to try to take in as much of the sensory information that this coffee offers us as possible, which generally speaking works well with a slurp. Yep. As you're moving to your next cup of coffee, you're just gonna rinse your spoon again, grab a little sample right in the bowl of the spoon, and slurp again. Essentially what you're going to do as you're cupping coffees is try to taste the coffees at least 3 times as the samples cool. The idea here is that we're going to perceive different qualities, whether that's different qualities of sweetness, different qualities of acidity, perhaps different flavors as the coffees evolve and cool in the cups. So what I will generally sort of suggest for everyone in the membership is that as we're tasting coffees together, we taste coffees right around 15 minutes, and then again, maybe 10 minutes later, and then ideally again, right as those coffees are approaching room temperature. I think that you'll be very surprised how the coffees change and evolve as we go through that progression. But essentially, that's all there is to it. Rinse your spoon in between cups and slurp with great aplomb. I think that should be everything you need to be set up for success on the upcoming season of the Cup Tasters membership. If you have any additional questions about cupping in general, setting up tastings, or equipment that you need, don't hesitate to check out the resources that we have accompanying this video, or reach out to us directly at the address below. We're really excited for the months to come, and your first 2 coffees will be headed to you shortly.